It's the perfect time to realize the full potential of the Justice 40 and to make reparative investments that restore community. So to get us started in our conversation, Nathaniel, I would like to turn to you. Nathaniel is founder and chief equity officer of Partnership for Southern Equity, and they are engaged across all types of infrastructure, energy, housing, transit and transportation, and economic development and growth, just to name a few. In all that you do, Nathaniel, you remind us that equity is a way, not a what. So can you tell us more about what that means and how that's reflected in how and what we're doing together through the Justice 40 Accelerator to get our conversation started?
Well, thank you, Michelle, for giving me an opportunity to open up this dialogue. And also, I want to sincerely thank all of the individuals who have chosen to invest their time in participating, by participating in this panel. And last but certainly not least, I want to acknowledge and lift up my Justice 40 Accelerator colleagues who have chosen to coalesce around this unique moment in time. And that is really where I want to start my comments, Michelle, is really this idea of time and how history in many ways is the greatest demarcation point between equity and equality. And if you look at history and look at, unfortunately, how public investments have in many ways been utilized to maintain structural inequity. It has in many ways developed infrastructure and other forms of growth in ways that have minimized opportunities for Black communities and historically invested communities of color to fully reach their full potential, whether it be from an individual perspective or from the perspective of community. And so we see this as an opportunity, specifically the Justice 40 executive order, as an opportunity to not just build back better, but to also ensure that we have a reparative lens connected, a lens that is focused on healing and making right many of the injustices that many communities have experienced, just as much as it is about preparing our communities for a clean energy transition and to combat climate change. It's also about making sure that we're healing our communities and leveraging this as an opportunity to repair the harm that has been realized from decades, and I would even humbly say centuries, of disinvestment, extraction, injustice, and exploitation.
You know, when we consider this moment and this powerful this powerful imperative to make investments reparatively, you know, we also have to think about lessons learned from the Recovery Act and how shovel ready can be a trap. Ann Evans, as founder and CEO of Elevate, you all were there then, and you saw many of those challenges and progress. Can you provide some perspectives for us, you know, on what we need to be thinking about around not falling into the shovel-ready trap?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And I'm also grateful to be with all of you, all my fellow panelists and all the participants, and really looking forward to learning also from others on what they think the shovel-ready trap is. So I'm hoping people are active in the chat as well. So when I was there, I experienced ERA like many of us. And I remember trying to figure out, what does shovel ready mean? And it wasn't quite clear at some level, as anything that's new is, but it basically means that the project is at the stage where work can begin and folks can be employed. So that means that the planning has been complete, any kind of permits or approvals or that kind of process has been complete. There's site control, so that people can actually begin to work. And so I thought of, what does that mean, for example, if a community wanted to have a community solar installation, and I know I'm talking to the experts here, so you all know more than I do, but if you want to have a community solar installation in your community that will dramatically reduce energy insecurity, so cut electric bills right away, and bring long-term benefits to a community that not only protect people from high utility bills, high electricity bills today, but well 20 years into the future. So if you want to do that and a new federal opportunity becomes available, in order to be shovel ready, you would have had to done all the planning, done all the technical analysis of how big it could be. You'd have to have acquired the site. You'd have to have done a technical study in partnership with the local utility to understand what those costs or how that might work. You'd have to have your plan for how everyone is going to be enrolled. If you can imagine, that whole enterprise takes, if you're lucky, 6 months. If you're not lucky, a couple of years. And all during that time, you're expending time, resources, hiring technical experts, maybe spending the money to acquire a site and get permits. There's a lot of expenditures that happen all along the way. And so you won't be surprised to hear this, but shovel-ready projects tend to be projects that are already pretty well resourced because they've had that time to make go through those multiple steps and make those big investments. And as we look to today and our hopes and dreams that we can actually invest in Black, Latinx, Indigenous communities in a way that's reparative, we need to make those investments in all of those planning stages ahead of time. And when you think about the time frame between when a federal opportunity hits and when you have to apply for it, it's actually structured in such a way that unless you've already made those investments, you may not be able to get to it. So I think as we all think and talk about equity, we have to get, I think, very specific about what does it actually take what barriers have to be removed in order to make those investments where I believe the commitment, the Justice 40 commitment is.
Thank you, Anne. Majora, you are the founder and CEO of the Hummingbird Firm. And one of the many leadership roles that your team plays is engaging with communities and working with big projects. When we think about not falling into the shovel-ready trap, meeting the moment and making reparative and restorative investments, and thinking about the many experts, including project sponsors, who were with us in the webinar today. What do people get right and get wrong about engaging with community members? So, I quote Nathaniel a lot, y'all. So we're doing things with, community leaders, not to community.
What they get right is knowing where the sources of good information lie, right? Knowing where the ideas are, reaching out to the groups who have identified the issues, identified the challenges, and have also selected the solutions that match best with the goals of that particular community. There's no new research that needs to be done. There's no data that needs to be gathered. They've already identified what the solutions are. But as Anne said, they don't have the financial resources to pay for the experts to create the pretty mock-ups and the designs of what they want to do. And sometimes they don't have the financial experts to create the spreadsheets and the return on the investment and speak some of that high level language that the government may want to hear about a project. And so they've identified the problems, they've identified the solutions, and then they may get connected with a more resourced organization that's going to help them. So not do it with them, but help them. And sometimes what that can result in, this is the what's not going right part of your answer, Michelle, is that they can get co-opted and their ideas could get absorbed into somebody else's grant application with no attribution, or maybe there is attribution, but then when the $1 million grant is approved and the ink is dry, they're receiving less than 5% of the overall funds to actually implement the project approaches and techniques that they chose, that they know how it's going to best be executed. And so while they are the catalyst, right? Sometimes they then end up being on the sidelines of the very projects that are occurring where they live. And that's hurtful, and it's painful, and it takes a long time to repair those trusts. So then what happens? Oh, well, I can't talk about it because I don't want someone to take it, but they don't end up actually able to do it because they're not talking about it. They don't get the resources. It's like this merry-go-round, right? And that's what we want to get grassroots organizations off of. We want to make sure that they're in environments where someone can work with them, as Nathaniel mentioned, in order to bring these projects that we know are going to be sustainable, build resilience, are going to last for decades and centuries to come. And they've rolled up their own sleeves where they live, and they've been an integral part in making that happen. So that's what's going right, that's what's not going so well, but that end part was what we can do to repair it. And it is going to take a process, but if we're all moving and action oriented, then it's someplace where we can move in the same direction together.
Thank you so much, Makar. You're getting a whole lot of amens in the chat, from people who appreciate, I want to, speaking truth to power. And so very true, and appreciation of your perspective from your experience coming from EPA as well. So thank you. And on all these questions, I want to invite all of our panelists to chime in and add to as well. I want to come to you next, Majora. And Majora, I'm blessed to count you as a colleague at Groundswell, and so grateful to have you as a co-facilitator, co-moderator, and leading the second half of our panel today. Building on Makara's perspectives, what do federal leaders need to do to support local leaders in building for equity, or what should federal leaders stop doing?
Well, it's interesting because as both of you were talking, Anne and Makara, I realized that I was actually part of that one little bit of people. As an activist, I actually did write a federal grant. The only time we were ever funded was when we partnered with a state agency, and we happened to be shovel ready, one of the few community-led and initiated projects on the ground. But when it came right down to it, the things that we didn't know were the things that absolutely hurt us. We didn't know, to write ourselves in, to be supportive of the work that we had been doing. I mean, literally, so much sweat equity had gone into working on those proposals. And, when it came right down to it, also all that money, and we're talking almost $50 million that came in, we had no way of securing the fact that much of that, it could be local, that with the benefits would be felt locally, economically through small businesses, that were in the community or close to it, or might even minority owned businesses from around the city. There was literally nothing in place to support that. And that's what, so when I think of like, what's my wish, it's like, how do we ensure that that economic benefits are felt locally, specifically by the folks that did put those things into place? And yes, I'm definitely hoping that, our partners in the federal government are going to look at that as a very serious thing that would actually be reparative.
Yes. Thank you so much, Majora. And Nathaniel, that brings me to another question for you. You know, you have often observed how we put a whole lot of good money into bad systems. So what's the long-term view, you know, on this moment of generational investment in infrastructure and the goals and vision of the Justice 40? How do we put this moment to work building momentum for long-term transformation? You know, that, as you always say too, really represents a revolution in values underlying the system too.
Well, I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that policy, in many ways, institutions and communities are a reflection of the values of people in power. And the process by which communities have access to resources, businesses have access to procurement and contracting opportunities, even in terms of who has access to good and new infrastructure, whether it be green or gray infrastructure, in many ways is dependent upon the values of people in power and how it translates within how dollars are invested and how policy is ratified and who benefits and who is hurt by that policy. And so it is no different that delivery systems, whether it be the contract and delivery systems or the procurement delivery systems, the infrastructure development delivery system, is also influenced by the history of structural racism and inequity that we experience in our communities. Without understanding that, then we will again have the challenges that we had, for example, with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, where we created more resilient communities, but not whole people, right? Or with the PPP resources that came through after COVID-19, where Black businesses, even though 40% of Black businesses were shut down, did not have access initially to the PPP dollars. It primarily went to white male business owners. So again, we have to understand that if we want to do good and create not only a greener world, but a more just world, we have to work to ensure that the delivery systems that we're depending on to get the money out to the communities that need it the most have been assessed, and been designed in a way that will ensure that the people who need it the most will have access to it first. And that is the work that I think the Justice 40 Accelerator is all about. And my prayer is that through the work that we will do along with our partners, that we will have a chance to ensure that the people that need it the most and the people who we say we serve and want to support are actually positioned again to be change agents in this process and not be in a position where change is happening to them again.
Before I move on to my next question, I want to just invite Makar or Anne. Would you guys want to chime in and add anything to Nathaniel's perspectives?
And I'll let you go first if you have something.
I'm just thinking and listening to Nathaniel because I always get so much great benefit from him. And I'm thinking also about your last question, Michelle, about what the leaders and the agencies can do now and what they can do more of and what they can do less of.
Yes.
Acknowledging all the constraints that they folks have to operate in. I think that some simple things that would go a long way and towards getting us closer to an equitable and reparative solution is take away the cost share and front fund. You know, cost reimbursable are words we'd like to never hear again, if that's possible. I'll kick it to Makara.
Well, Anne, I think you just gave a good example of barriers to entry.
Yes.
And I think we've all touched on that in certain ways, in that the process needs to be streamlined to match the folks that are trying to apply for these financial opportunities. And the other thing I would say is, who's defining benefits? You know, if we're talking about a structure, right, or institution that truly doesn't have the complete cultural competency that's necessary to to understand some of the pains and the exposure that these communities are having, are they in a position to define what benefits are? And is there a dialogue taking place with these frontline communities so that they can express what they see as a benefit, what success looks like to them, right? And I've just been having this recurring conversation with folks about benefits. There's a subjective nature to it. I think sometimes it's community specific, it can be region specific, but I think what's important is just to make sure that frontline communities and grassroots organizations are involved in the dialogue of what is their perspective of what benefits are. You know, obviously, you know, there's some things that we agree on in terms of, you know, climate action and resilience and using renewable energy and access. And, you know, those are kind of table stakes of we understand those concepts, but what does it look like in action on an everyday basis to you? People get really excited about bike trails, but the one question we always ask at our firm is, well, who's using the bike trails? Is it for people using it for recreation? Or is it because people have to use the bike to get to work? Those are two different approaches, and those and based off of what the result is that you're attempting to achieve, you would approach structuring that bike lane in a different way. That's just an example. And so we have to really, really get down to what benefits are you talking about? And if the people who are supposed to be oh so excited, are they excited about the benefits that you're talking about?
And Michelle, if I may just, and this is just for 2 seconds, because I think it's really important to put a pin in what Majora said. Language matters. The language that you utilize to define the work and define communities, in many ways, again, is the reflection of the gaze of the individual in power and how they see vulnerable and disinvested communities. So it is definitely about how you define a benefit and a burden. But I think the most dangerous word, in my opinion, a word that is in many ways a cloak for structural racism, in many ways, when we talk about procurement and investing in vulnerable communities, is risk, right? The word risk, and how it is used in many occasions to justify a disinvestment in communities, to justify a certain community's interest in not listening to the wisdom and experiences of other communities. So we've got to not only unpack this question about benefits and burdens, but also how are we defining risk? And how does that, how in on many occasions that word is used in many ways to minimize the realization of justice in our communities.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel. Thank you. And I want to uplift a couple of questions from the QA too, and appreciate how active folks are being there. And, you know, I think that when we're talking about how to transform infrastructure investments, as Hobie Stocking on the webinar today has noted, is infrastructure is often a bit of a boring term. And you know, I think Nathaniel's perspectives offered some really powerful ideas about how to, you know, how to frame it and how to talk about it in a way that hits people in the heart, right? Not just in their head. But then we have to go from the sublime, you know, almost to the ridiculous, right? You know, and talk about these barriers to entry that Majora has highlighted and that Anne has highlighted. Cost shares and versus upfront investment, someone has asked about. And, you know, many federal grant award opportunities, you know, even the small ones. I'm a former OMBer, you know, from once upon a time. So if it was under $1 billion, sometimes folks called it decimal dust. I'm someone for whom $50,000 is still, I like $50 is still a lot of money to me. But even many small federal awards require that you bill the government in arrears. And sometimes it can take many months to actually get paid. So for a small organization, you know, you have to be able to float that from a cash flow perspective. It's sort of like you're lending labor and lending money to the government, and having to not being able to get those investments up front, and then also having to cost share. So if the government is going to, if a federal award is going to fund 80% of a project, you've got to go out and get the other 20%. Those can be insurmountable burdens. You know, even for some of the webinar participants that we've done for the Justice 40 Accelerator, people have been prevented from moving forward in the process just by the application requirements, which can literally be hundreds of pages long, you know, as federal leaders work to meet their internal transparency and documentation requirements. So there's a real challenge here to meet in the middle. As we wrap up this first portion of the, you know, of the panel, and I hand the baton to my colleague Majora, as she leads us in the second phase of the conversation, I want to round us out with a quick lightning round, if you will, among our panelists. And in doing that, I want to uplift a question from another one of our attendees about whether there is a focus, and I would say whether there should be a focus, for instance, on the Southeast, you know, where many of the burdens, many of the disparities, you know, have a much greater impact than other parts of the country. Nathaniel, I know you got something to say about that. So as we go round robin here, Majora, I'm going to come to you last as we hand over. And as we think about, again, just the challenge to be reparative and restorative in our infrastructure investments, what has to be in the final infrastructure plan? Or how it's implemented, what's got to be in the plan, or how has it got to be implemented, you know, to make sure that the Justice 40 reaches its potential for reparative and restorative investments. Nathaniel, why don't you kick us off?
And I'll be quick. You know, similar to local infrastructure policies that focus on a fix it first approach, you know, an approach that focuses on fixing the most damaged infrastructure first before you invest in new infrastructure. You know, I think that we have to have a systemic approach around fix it first as it relates to the levels of injustice and inequity that we've experienced in our nation, which first began in the American South, right? So for me, I believe that, you know, while all areas of our communities are important, of the nation is important, I do think that we need to really begin to invest the type of resources and the type of political courage needed in order to turn around and transform the place where stolen labor and stolen land was perfected. And that is in the American South, and how the echo of that legacy continues to create a region that, from an environmental perspective, a health perspective, an economic perspective, and many other indicators, is still at the bottom of the barrel. So again, I mean, of the list. So I still think that there's an opportunity through this effort to again focus some of those resources in a strategic way to the southern region.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Anne.
Yeah, I would agree on that. I think in addition to everything Nathaniel said, the very real impacts of climate change are causing pain and harm every day. And yeah, for me, it's really an imperative that we address that. So I would totally 100% agree with what Nathaniel said. And then from one of my hopes, I'm going to focus on implementation, because I also like to quote Nathaniel, and equity is a how. So let's focus on how we implement this. And hearing Majora's pain of hours and hours working on projects in the past that I know is shared probably by so many people. Investing in planning, making investments in planning can go a long way to repairing these past harms.
Absolutely. Makara.
So Majora really called it in terms of sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. But enough of us have, taken some missteps and tripped along the way, or done the shoulda, woulda, coulda, or dang, and I wish I knew, that, you know, others shouldn't have to go that road. It should be a road that's traveled. There's still roads that have yet to be traveled, but not that road. And so I think it's really important for us to create safe spaces, because there really is an abundance. Really is enough for everyone. I just think that organizations and the folks in the South have had to survive with a scarcity mindset, but the information is there. So making sure that we are creating platforms where we can share, we can exchange. And so the next similarly situated group knows what to ask for because of Majora's group's experience. That can be shared. And so they know what to ask for, and they're not in that position where they're looking back. And I think that's really low-hanging fruit. That's all about communication. That's all about sharing and transparency and being vulnerable, right? And none of us know everything. And being able to really lock arms when it's necessary so that we can all get there together, even though we're all at different places along the trajectory. And I think that if that's an approach that can be embraced in the South, where it's needed so much, because you're battling some infrastructures that just don't want to let go, and are still serving as that barrier to entry, as Nathaniel has mentioned. But there is a path forward if we're willing to move forward together.
Thank you, Makara. And Majora, as we shift into the second part of our panel today.
Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here with you all as I think one of the newest members, part of the team that's working to support Justice 40 going forward with Groundswell. I am just delighted to be here. And I'm especially delighted because I'm going to be talking, with the folks that are out there literally on the ground getting stuff done. And that's like the super exciting part because, basically y'all teed it up with regard to like what kind of atmosphere do we need to build in order to create, the right environment for frontline groups to do what they do best, which is literally work to impact the dreams, the hopes and dreams and aspirations of their communities. And so it's super important that we see that. But then, so I'm going to start with Nathaniel, who's going to be a nice little segue, and sort of bridge between the policy and the and the project panel. And so I've heard you say, Nathaniel, that that in many conversations that are kind of related to, let me clear my screen here, that are related to justice, they're based in the future that has not happened yet. And you've said, and I hope I get this right, that what we should be talking about is the repair that needs to happen now in order to heal our communities from the effects of systemic racism and economic exclusion and environmental degradation. So, and I totally remember that. And I ran, a green job training and placement systems, especially, for folks that were, either many of them returning to society, from being ex-offenders. They needed accessible jobs. They needed to feel like they were actually providing a valuable service for their community. And, and they also needed to pay rent, stuff like that. So these were real live projects. And so could you paint a picture, to everybody listening right now, what exactly does that look like, in terms of, stuff on the ground as you see it and support for your community in light of Justice 40?
Yeah, thank you, Majora. I mean, and it's not, and this, I mean, it's not that complicated. We know that for decades, um, you know, of course, before the 20th century, but we can begin there, that there were policies and investments that were made and not made that not only created broken communities, but broken people. We know that there were federal policies in place that encouraged segregation. And when that segregation was encouraged, the resources by way of the banks, the real estate industry, highway investments, the development of highways on top of many of these communities that were not considered valuable, created an environment, right, that really, in my opinion, fully articulated a very different set of values as it relates to how we saw all people as valuable and important, and all places as valuable and important to our nation. And I believe that it's very hard to build a sturdy house of inclusion and resilience and regeneration and sustainability, with at the same time have an unsturdy foundation of structural injustice and structural racism. So for me, it's not just about building for the future, because you can build as high as you want, but if you build on top of an unsturdy foundation, then the house is going to fall. And so for me, it's simple. It's about how can we look at these investments not just through a lens of resilience and preparation, but also utilizing a lens of a reparative lens, a lens of reparations and restitution and care and healing, as an approach to ensure that we can really create the type of communities that all people deserve to live in. And I believe that this provides an opportunity for us to do that. The Justice 40 decision provides an opportunity for us to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So do you have any like specific, concrete, because I think it was interesting because the bottom line is like literally the roots of repair and reparation. It is literally in both Old English and Latin, to make ready again.
That's right. That's right. That's good, Majora. So, so when I think about the work, and of course, we'll have a chance to hear from Mayor Dina Ingram from East Point, but when I think about the work that we're doing with the city of Atlanta around its first green infrastructure bond, working to capitalize a bond that will not only work to ensure that equitable green infrastructure is created, but also local communities have access to job opportunities as that infrastructure is expanded. To me, is a great opportunity for the Justice 40 initiative to be supportive of not just one pot of bond dollars, but many pots of bond dollars that could support local hiring. We also know, the work that we do around equitable transit-oriented development, working to ensure, right, that there is adequate connectivity and walkability and even financing that is needed to not only ensure that TOD occurs, but mixed income, equitable TOD occurs in communities that are in need of infrastructure. And then, of course, I said before, the work, I really think that we have to have a fix it first culture, new and improved, when it's already new is not a real accomplishment, right? So how can we find ways to leverage these dollars in a way to go into these communities where, mothers have to push their children on the street in strollers because the sidewalks are so bad. Let's find a way to fix that.
Got it. So on that note, so we're going to stay in Georgia for a minute. And so Mayor Holiday Ingram, it's lovely to meet you. And so, most folks, haven't had a chance to visit East Point, Georgia. Can you tell us a little bit about your city?
So thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm Holiday Ingram, Mayor of the great city of East Point, where there's no point like East Point. And that is because we are a city of almost 35,000 amazing East Pointers who are multicultural, multi-generational, very significant LGBTQIA plus population in our city. We're about 75, 76%. We haven't gotten the census back yet, but of African Americans, about 16% white, and about double digits, around 10% Hispanic population. We have a very thriving community and opportunity for people to kind of feel like they're in a small town, but next to a metropolis. And so we have a number of different events to bring people together organically around those things that we all enjoy: food, music, fun. And we really pride ourselves on really strategically and intentionally taking action to make equity and inclusion more than a cliche in our city. and that it is something that is not, as Nathaniel says, it's a way, right? And not only is it a way, it's a way for us every day. And it's an intentional acts that we take to ensure that everyone feels welcome and included in our city. And that as we grow, that we grow equitably. We equitably revitalize and redevelop our city in a way that honors, respects, and allows legacy residents and legacy businesses to grow with us. And to ensure that there continues to be housing within our city that everyone can afford regardless of income level. And so
on, go ahead. So on that note, how do you undertake, creating East Point's equitable growth and inclusion plan, and what are the most important elements, of the plan when it comes right down to the projects that you're doing, that you want to see in the American Jobs Plan Fund?
Well, this work absolutely could not have been done without Nathaniel Smith and the Partnership for Southern Equity. And it's been an amazing partnership from the beginning. We started the work, I would say, around just before the pandemic in 2020. And they have been extremely flexible along the way. And so a number of things that I jotted down as you guys have been talking about making sure the community is included. And, language is important, right? And so a lot of this has been, as we are building, the plan and the ordinances and putting things structurally in place, there's been a real big focus on community engagement. And engagement has gone from a survey that covered a number of areas for our community to respond to. And I think we had over 300 responses to that. We also had an East Point Leaders for Equity Academy, where we had 20 people initially start going through the process. I think we had about 14 graduate through this 8-month process to build their capacity around, what does this work mean? Because it's one thing for myself and the 8 council members to get it, but really it has to be, in order for it to be a way, we have to make sure that the community understands it well. We also had a summer of equity learn and share to basically provide Zoom sessions for people to come and learn more about development that benefits community, housing for everyone, environmental justice, building community wealth through small business innovation. And then we also had some in-person COVID safe listening sessions at a park in each of our 4 wards. And that really kind of was to get people's feedback around this industrial moratorium we had put in place. Because if I could just please share, we talked about the history of environmental injustice and really the ways in which these injustices have happened over centuries. East Point's story starts back on July 15th, 1912, when the East Point City Council unanimously adopted an ordinance that required all Black people in the city to live in a 45-acre tract of land that was immediately adjacent to 3 fertilizer plants, a oil plant, and a chemical plant. So bad, the nickname was Stinktown. It became known as Washington community, but it was so bad that they call it Stinktown. And of course, those were for-profit reasons, right? So that they could keep an eye on the workers, so that they would be close to work, and all of those self-serving reasons. But while that started in that area, and let me just say, the community definitely went from struggle to triumph, right? And had a lot of things that happened that we celebrate in that community. But that level of industrialization immediately adjacent or nearby residential areas spread through other areas within our city. So now it's a more diverse group of people who are still being impacted by environmental injustices. And even we have a part of a water source going through one of our parks near a neighborhood that was in that area that from the 1912. And mind you, Atlanta didn't pass its first redlining ordinance until 1913, and the state of Georgia did not amend the Constitution until 1928. So it blazed the trail in the wrong way. And so that's why I feel it's incumbent for us to deal with it. But there is a bright blue-green water source or water stream going through a neighborhood in that area today, because I believe industrial business chose profit over people. And instead of complying with the EPA requirements and remediating things, now that it's been designated as an impaired stream, we now as a city have to come up with a plan to remediate what was caused by someone who chose to walk away with profits, right? Or a business chose to walk away with profits. And so our equitable growth and inclusion plan has 4 pillars: community engagement, of course, just energy, so that the whole industrial part that I just told you about, we implemented a moratorium from February to December. And at the end of that, passed new or amended our industrial zoning districts to remove some of those very harmful manufacturing, hard, heavy industrial type polluting things from the ordinance as a matter of right. So they have to have a special use permit. It also includes inclusionary housing. And then the fourth is equitable economic development.
So it seems like there's going to be, that you were already sort of fast on your track to turn out, like, how do you create from the fact that this was used to be called Stink Town, and now how are we actually making it ready again to be a thriving, place that's embracing of it, understanding its history, but embracing of the future that you're about to create. So that's really amazing. Thank you for sharing that and for teaching. Because Lord knows we can never forget that kind of stuff. So right.
Well, I had a good instructor, Nathaniel and PSC. They do good courses.
Yeah, they're pretty good. I'll admit. Yeah, there you go.
And Majora, if I may, one of the things that I just wanted to lift up, with the Justice 40 initiative, we focus a lot on, of course, infrastructure, physical infrastructure. But I think the lesson from Mayor Holliday is that the civic infrastructure of communities is just as important as the physical infrastructure of communities. And that is where I think the real opportunities lie as well, to get things together in communities that have been left behind.
Absolutely. And that human capital, that is the biggest source of the greatest infrastructure that any of our cities, towns, whatever have. And so and I think with that, we're going to move to Florida, where the Miami Climate Alliance, like one of their mission is people-centered solutions to the climate crisis. And I'm delighted to have, Jeanette Ruiz here with us to tell us a little bit about what they've been working on. And I have a quick question for you. Where to start is so a term, climate gentrification. And where'd you go on? There you go. Climate gentrification, and it is definitely among a major focus for the Miami Climate Alliance. And for those who are not familiar with that term, could you just share what it means and how it's actually impacting Miami?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. I just want to do a mic check. Can you hear me? Everything's good? Okay, good. So first off, I'm a Miami girl. I've been here since I was 2 years old, so I claim the city. And one thing I know for sure is that Miami is known for her beaches, right? It's good weather, our water, and just a good time. So we're like vacation vibes, right? But what we've been dealing with for years now is the reality that our water is rising and causing major issues. It's not uncommon for us to experience flooding on a sunny day. And if we have king tide or a major storm, the low elevation areas such as Miami Beach are underwater. So developers know they've been dealing with the fact that sea level rise is real and it's costing them money. So they're looking to the future and moving inland to higher elevation areas, right? In Miami, most of the low income areas and historically Black neighborhoods, such as Little Haiti, Liberty City, and Overtown, have the highest elevation. So for example, South Beach has an elevation of 0, and I just want to get it right. And Liberty City is at 10 feet. So it's predicted that Miami can expect 14 to 34 inches of sea rise by 2060. So although the higher elevation communities are the most resilient in terms of climate change, they're the most vulnerable to gentrification. So the result of this trend inland is that people are being pushed out of their homes. Rents are extremely high. The wait list for affordable housing is really long. And the social fabric of these communities are being changed forever. Years and years of history and culture from these cities are being wiped out. And this is what we mean when we say climate gentrification, which is a term that was coined here. By the way, I always like to give a shout out to Miami. So in addition to sea level rise, we have an increase in high heat days. It's 93 degrees outside and it's May. And a predicted intense hurricane season. Miami is feeling the real-time effects of climate change on a daily basis. And at the Miami Climate Alliance, we focus our work on supporting frontline communities and those most vulnerable to climate injustices. And as you mentioned, we work on people-centered, community-driven solutions to issues like climate gentrification.
So tell us, what are some of the anti-climate gentrification measures that you're either focusing on or planning to focus on? Because that is the kind of thing that I'd be super psyched to work on, with you as in my capacity at, with the Justice 40. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, A lot of it too, and this goes with Nathaniel talking about, fixing the foundation, right? It's like, one thing that comes to mind is our work with disaster resilience and just preparing our community. We have a community emergency operations center that was essentially founded by Valencia Gunder, who's an amazing activist here in Florida. And the motto is, your neighbor is your first responder, right? So what we do is we not only prepare our communities for a storm, but we're there from start to finish, right? Because it's like, we need to have these systems in place, because we know that the neighborhoods that need it the most don't get the resources, right? So during a storm or after a storm, we have to have each other's back. And that's the kind of community work that we do on a daily basis to prepare ourselves for what may come, in addition to kind of everything else that we're dealing with.
Right. So what are some of the everything else that you're dealing with? Because
so we do a lot of work on affordable housing as well. Like, as the mayor was mentioning, like, some of those initiatives that you guys have going, I think they're incredible, and I would love to see that reflected here in Miami. One of the struggles is, getting our government, our local government, to hear community input. We fight for it every single day. It's like you were, I think it was you, Majora, and Nathaniel, that was mentioning, the solutions are there. Our communities know what they need. It's not for them to do these countless studies that nothing comes of it. You know what I mean? It's like, all you have to do is just ask your community. When you talk about shovel ready, we have shovel ready projects. It's just a matter of us being able to get our community a seat at the table. So on issues like affordable housing, on leading into climate change, on disaster resilience, on any kind of resilient infrastructure projects. Like someone, I think it was Michelle, said infrastructure is a boring term. Not for us down here. Infrastructure is imperative. I think of it every single day when it's extremely hot and I have to drive my dog to a neighborhood that has a tree canopy because I can't walk in my own neighborhood. So those things.
Yeah. So I have a question from the audience, and this is for everybody. Can you all speak to the importance of home ownership and home ownership as a pathway to generational wealth within the context of all of the amazing plans that y'all are working on?
For the African American community in particular, and for other communities of color, it has been the primary place where wealth has been accumulated is through home ownership. But if we connect, in addition to that, because I don't want to negate that point, if we connect it though to the Justice 40 work and the work around a reparative agenda, it's not the house that generates the wealth, it's the land that the house sits on. And if you have bad infrastructure and equitable investments in Black communities, you just have shelter. You don't have an opportunity to generate wealth. So that's why this work around Justice 40 is so important, and this reparative conversation is so important, because we know through the research, in particular in the past with David Russ and others, is that you have what you call a segregation tax, where Black communities and communities of color are not allowed to accumulate as much equity in their homes, even if their homes are the same as white homes, because of the color of their skin, right? We have to find a way through this Justice 40 initiative to make sure that all communities have the infrastructure they need in order to ensure that the home ownership in these Black communities and brown communities actually have a chance to at least break through somewhat the history of structural racism and land use. And that's another reason why it's important to look at the land and not just the house, and the infrastructure around the land and not just the house.
Right. And one of the things I'm excited that Justice 40 is also going to be doing is technical assistance, specifically, like, how do we support people to even understand what that means and make sure that we're preparing people, honestly, so that another 2008, like, crazy mortgage thing doesn't ever happen again. We are really preparing people from the onset. So I'm sorry, I just had to put that in there. And so Mayor Holiday Ingram, what are you thinking in the homeownership question?
So home ownership is really critical, right? And when I think about housing, I think about the full continuum of housing. That literally starts with people experiencing homelessness to what people call attainable housing. In our city, and I think attainable housing just was created by people who don't like affordable housing, because people place a color of people, a race of people, a socioeconomic, some stigma on affordable housing, when if you have a mortgage and $1 million house with a mortgage, your house is affordable for you. Right. Because mortgage is an affordable housing tool, right? But some kind of way in America, we got to this place where you have people who literally say, and people of color are the ones who surprise me the most when they really say, we don't need any more affordable housing. And I'm like, what do you mean? So if you don't believe that housing, people should be able to afford to be housed and that housing is a fundamental right, then do you support homelessness? And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, that's a bit extreme, but that's, to me, in essence, what you're saying. So this housing affordability, from people experiencing homelessness to getting them housed through either permanently supportive housing, transitional housing, right? Workforce development housing, affordable housing, sustainable housing, and all in between. We need to ensure that we maintain a level of diversity. So right now in the city of East Point, we have an extremely diverse housing stock, literally housing that anyone can afford regardless of income level and for every income level. And in order to continue to maintain that, yes, when we talk about development coming into the city, we have a 20-acre project coming in downtown East Point that will have some market rate apartment units, but as well as hopefully submitting an application for workforce development housing, right? And phase 2 may also include some single family or townhomes. So homeowners, so we might end up with a project in the heart of our downtown that has market rate apartments, workforce development apartments, and home ownership on the same footprint, right? But that is because a private developer decided that that was important to them, and we're partnering with them. And it's just, God sends the things you need when you need it, when you're ready, and when the climate is right, right? Having conversations with MARTA around a transit-oriented development that can bring some more housing affordability or some housing in the city that is not just for the extremes. And, you know, when we talk about inclusionary housing and these models, like, honestly, if you do 10% affordable and 90% market, you create an 80% gap that never closes. And we wonder why in 10 years or less, cities or communities are totally transformed because the gap just keeps growing and growing and growing, and you're not building enough housing stock. So what about maybe a 70-30, 60-40, right? Like if you need incentives from the city, if you want us to partner in a way from, you know, we have a number of different incentives that we can provide because we own our own water and electric, and, you know, we're a full service city. But there has to be benefit for our community.
Absolutely. And it's so
earlier,
important.
right? Benefits, like how do you define benefits? And for me, it's something that truly supports the people who are there. We can't get so focused on attracting new people to the city. Like we want to try to get them to come here. We do, but we want to respect and build and grow with the people who have been here with us. And so that they can thrive and they can prosper along with what happens.
It's like retaining the talent that's in your community and making sure that the diversity is already there. How do you support it to stay? You know, and that's a lot about the economic diversity, which is I'm so glad folks are actually starting to have that kind of conversation. And so there's another question, you know, specifically for Jeanette, because in line with, like, our communities are diverse, you know, but there are lots of folks going on in there. And in particular, there's a question that was asked about one of the priorities of Miami Climate Alliance is immigration reform. So can you talk a little bit about that in relation to reparative infrastructure solutions and Justice 40, and how do those two things come together?
You know, I think that's a really long answer, and I would like to, it's kind of involved, and whoever asked the question, I would drop my email in here and we could follow up. But it's multi-layered, and I don't think we have enough time, to be honest.
Can you give us some high points? Because I'm kind of curious. I think we're all sort of curious, especially because many of the places around the country, this is going to be something that's going to be factored in.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't prepared to answer the question, and we have other people that are definitely more educated on the topic than I am, but I would love to follow up with them.
We'd love to hear it. Okay, thanks. Okay, awesome. So we're over the top of the hour. Can we keep going? Because we do have more questions. Somebody give me some direction, and I hope it's not okay. Y'all got to wrap it up.
Why don't we take the just as a suggestion, with folks are generous with their time. Why don't we take until 15 past, another 10 minutes, take a couple more questions, and then do a wrap up round?
Yeah. Okay.
That works.
Perfect. Okay, so we've got a really wonderful question, about urban ag in East Point. So either somebody
What's the
knows what you're up
question?
to or
They
feels that
do
we
know
should
what
know.
I'm up to. What is the specific question so I can make sure I tailor my response?
They have a just a question about urban ag in East Point. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was the question.
Okay, so the city of East Point was selected by Food Well Alliance and Atlanta Regional Commission to create a city urban agriculture plan. So there were a number of cities applied. We were part of the finalists and we were selected, and we were excited about it because we already had some community assets in place. We have a farmers market that has been going on in our downtown for almost over a decade. We have a cooperative group that has grown called Market 166 of residents from East Point, College Park, Hateville, kind of like this area around our city. 166 is a highway that goes through here. And so that's the name. And so that's developed. And this whole idea of we have a food access challenge, right? We have an issue attracting a grocery store to our downtown or to our heart of our city. And I don't understand because we all understand economics and supply and demand, and people need food to live. And so people buy food. So there's a demand for it. We just don't have the supply. So they looked at the glass as half full and started working on that co-op. We have a number of people who have community gardens or are urban farmers. We have the Metro Atlanta Urban Farm right at our border. We had Truly Living Well. So we had a number of assets that I think really positioned us. We had a Healthy Point initiative that I launched about 3 years ago, a 90-day initiative to focus on health and not just like the body, because I believe that being healthy is not a size, it's a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get people to make healthier choices, regardless of the size that they are right now? Like the goal is to be healthier. And so we were doing that work and had movie night and watched Forks Over Knives, Food Inc. and What the Health, right? To get the mind right, because a lot of it is mental. So we were doing all of that work and that positioned us for this opportunity. And so we went through a process. There was, we had a community asset mapping 6-month period. Then we went into the strategic planning. We selected a steering committee of East Pointers. Each council member and the mayor appointed someone to that committee. We also had some staff people on that committee as well. And they worked with Food Well Alliance and Atlanta Regional Commission to create the City Urban Agriculture Plan, which was just recently adopted by council at our last meeting in April. I think it was April 19th. And so now we are in the implementation phase. And one of the things in the ordinance is an urban agricultural commission, again, to keep the community engaged, right? The person appointed by mayor and council members, there's 8 council members, so that'll be 9 people. And they will be able to then take the plan that has been adopted. We also amended our comprehensive plan to include the urban agricultural plan as a part of our community goals section. So when you talk about this work, it is critically important to build it in. You have to try to at least envision a way that it outlives you, right? Like, so if it becomes a part of the system, it doesn't matter who comes along, the system is working, right? So that there'll be that commission. And as a part of that, we received a $75,000 grant through that. But then Food Well Alliance applied for a USDA grant and was awarded $250,000 that goes along with that work. And they've hired an urban agriculture manager. So that is the person that kind of works with the city, the Food Well Alliance, everybody in the community is kind of helping to make this happen. It's critically important that the government prioritizes it, has a plan for it, and that there is a connection to the government, right? This commission will be that connection, but the work really happens external to the government for sustainability, right? And so that's the urban agriculture plan in a nutshell.
But that's a plan that so it's not fully implemented yet, clearly, right? But the idea is that ultimately you're going to be creating this like a food-based piece of infrastructure,
a local food
ecosystem, but which will mean there'll be concrete examples. You know, whether it's a market, whether it's an actual brick and mortar store, whether it's programs that are designed to support those folks, and that's all infrastructure that you're creating. that you're basically setting the foundation so that you can create. So on that note, I'm just curious, I'd love to hear, from both Jeanette, you and Nathaniel, just give an example of whether it's a large or a small project, or one that is still like in the mind and you're ruminating on or whatever, but whether you won the proposal to do it or not, I don't care, just but really put it out there. What kind of project actually exemplifies how infrastructure can be built for equity? Like, that was a great example of infrastructure that's going to be built to address the food insecurity issues, and healthier people are healthy. You just created that infrastructure. So Jeanette, can you go first, please?
Yeah, I'll go back to my previous example of the tree canopies. And I think Majora was you who was saying, I can't remember, the person who had mentioned the bike lanes. No, I don't think that was, I think
Makara.
that was Makara.
Yeah.
Another M. And it's exactly that. It's like we've had programs that were like, let's add more trees. And it's like, okay, great. But some neighborhoods got like the nice thick trees and some other neighborhoods got palm trees, and palm trees are not effective for shade nor for climate reasons, so for me, that would be like a major thing, because as I was mentioning, we're in summertime here in Miami. It's like, it is full blown summer, and we need more adaptive measures to deal with these high heat days, especially in our most vulnerable communities, because it's nothing but concrete, right? It's like we have bus stops where it's just a sign. There's no covering. And, we need more trees, and we need more infrastructure to make our communities walkable as well. And because, like I said, I take my dog to a nicer community, that has the trees and has like the wide sidewalks, and you want to walk there. It's like you want to be part of that community and not be indoors all the time. So definitely tree canopies for sure.
Yeah. No, this is, I mean, you just like, I feel like we're cut from the same cloth. My neighborhood in the South Bronx was exactly like that. Like, we would leave our neighborhood to go and like hang out in parks in other people's neighborhoods too. And, so now, like, I really do feel that the Justice 40 and the work we can do is really help people show that we don't have to move out of our neighborhood to live in better ones.
Yes.
Like the ones that that we're designing them, for the future that we want and that we deserve. So anyway, you just brought me back a little while. So sorry about that. I digress. But Nathaniel, tell us a story.
So one of the real exciting opportunities that we're actually doing in partnership with Groundswell and the Atlanta University Center, which is the largest conglomerate of African American colleges and universities in the country. We're in the process now of working to develop a resilience hub in the Atlanta University Center that will not only through a microgrid provide energy for the Atlanta University Center, but also through battery technology provide energy opportunities for the communities that live around the Atlanta University Center. We also hope through this resilience hub to also provide workforce development opportunities for not only the students, but also for the people who live in the community. I always tell people that there's nothing that us highfalutin academic privileged folks can tell people in the hood about what it means to be resilient. There's nothing that we can tell them about what resilience means when they've been living a resilient life for over 400 years in America.
Yep.
What we can do is learn from them and also create an opportunity for them not to just survive, but to thrive. And we believe that for us, it's not just about creating a resilience hub, but a healing hub for the communities that have been left behind. And unfortunately, in many of the communities that reside around historically Black colleges, many of those communities are disinvested in. Some of them are being gentrified now. But at the same time, we think that the Resilience Hub work that we're doing in the Atlanta University Center in partnership with Spelman and other schools at the Atlanta University Center, and of course, I'm a Morehouse alum, will provide an opportunity for us to maybe translate what we learned from that experience to other HBCUs around the country.
So I think we're at 5:15. And I've watched a little bit of the talk, and yeah, I think we could keep going on, and I bet we could share stories, and we will. I mean, this is the beginning, of what I think is just an amazing part of where we go from here. And I'm excited to be on the path with all of you. And I just want to, thank all of our panelists, Nathaniel Smith and Jeanette Ruiz and Mayor Holiday Ingram, and my amazing colleagues as well from all the other panels. And thank you so much, Michelle. And is there anything else that we're supposed to be doing to round out this hour?
We'll call it a wrap. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us in this wonderful conversation this afternoon about building for justice, reparative and restorative through infrastructure. And we appreciate all the great questions. And yes, sir, please do share the final slide. We've got the link to the Justice 40 Accelerator in the chat as well for anybody who's interested. And we will take the great questions that we've had here today together and some of the suggestions that folks have shared as well, that they want to hear more of these kind of conversations to doing exactly that and bring more great stories forward and just work joyfully, in service to this powerful work. Thank you so much, everybody.
Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.